And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your hopefully happy hump day early evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks 32 years. It's fucking incredible. 32 years since the release of what is easily one of the 10 best big studio comedies Hollywood put out in the decade of the 90s, which I've always said the single greatest movie decade. And I would also argue, and have argued, doesn't mean I win the argument, but I have made the argument, that 1993 is the single best year Hollywood ever had. Not in terms of box office relative to GDP or all of this kind of shit, but the single best year in terms of the number of movies that either are masterpieces or are right on the cusp of masterpieces. There are no other years. Some people argue 1999. Others say, well, what about 94 with Shawshank, Gump, and Pulp Fiction? I've heard all of it. I lived through it. I hadn't started NYU Film School in 93. I started in the fall of 94. But I am convinced that 93 is the single best year Hollywood has ever had. And a big part of that are two of the comedies of the year, one being this film, Ivan Reitman's Dave, which was released 32 years ago today, and another being Harold Ramis's Groundhog Day. So they're kind of an interesting Ghostbusters connection that Harold Ramis and Bill Murray made Groundhog Day, which was released in February, not surprisingly, of 93. And then Ivan Reitman, the director of Ghostbusters, puts out the movie Dave. And Dave is a film that I am proud to say, unlike a lot of brand name movies, and I've kind of joked about it on the channel, films that I had opportunities to see, including, speaking of great comedies of the 90s, Home Alone, and I punted, opportunity to see Goodfellas twice, punted. But my dear old dad, Alan Philip Cohen, the biggest movie fan I've ever known, he and I saw Dave on its opening day at the movie theater, which used to be called the Syosset. It is now the Equinox Gym, right where Route 135 comes to an end at what is called in that part of Long Island, Jericho Turnpike. Where I live now is called Middle Country Road. But where Route 25 starts to end at 25, you get out, and there was a movie theater, which still looks like a movie theater, but it's an Equinox Gym. Dad and I went there because we lived across the street at what is now Eagle Rock. Everything, with everything, turn, everything changes. But we saw Dave on its opening day, and both my father and I had a high degree of confidence that we were going to like the movie. The advance buzz was good. Most of the critical reviews were favorable, and if you go on Rotten Tomatoes right now, it is at 95%. Now, I don't need to tell you that for a comedy, and particularly a big studio comedies don't usually take very many risks. They play it safe, generally speaking. There are those that would argue that this film plays it safe. In fact, to be more precise, and to give you an even deeper dive, of the critics whom I respected the most, there are two critics. Number one, the late great Roger Ebert, the Pulitzer Prize winning critic. Roger Ebert loved this movie, and I think that I saw his review with his partner Gene Siskel. I'm not sure about Gene, but I'm pretty sure I saw their program before we saw the movie. Sometimes they would air it in a couple of days in advance. But David Denby, my second favorite critic, writing in New York Magazine, he thought the film was just okay. He didn't love it. He thought it was an attempt at satire that didn't quite land. He said it should be punchier than it is. I don't think that Reitman hits the targets that he was trying to. I don't really agree, and I didn't disagree with David Denby very often, but I feel like he just had the wrong handle on this film. Now, from a certain point of view, Dave is a product of its time. And by that, I mean to say it was produced at a very specific point in history. It was produced after the first Gulf War, and when we had a president of the United States at the time in the first Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was not really that polarizing of a figure. He was not necessarily corrupt, but he was somebody that maybe was a little bit out of touch when it came to regular Americans. Maybe. And I don't know that that's really true, but there was a perception that H.W. Bush, and he was a one-term president in part because we had a recession at the worst possible time, but this film was conceived and it went into production fully believing that George Herbert Walker Bush was going to get a second term. There is no question. And the reason why I say that is the character played by Kevin Kline, who was not that far removed from winning an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, just a sensational comic performance in Charles Crichton's A Fish Called Wanda, a film also pretty well remembered by history. Jamie Lee Curtis, John Cleese. Kevin Kline plays President of the United States. He is somebody, not that he's supposed to be George Herbert Walker Bush, it's not, but he's presented as a kind of moderate Republican, I guess is what you would call it, which H.W. Bush, and to some extent also W. Bush, in real life, how they tried to perform their duties. As W. Bush famously said, he called himself a compassionate conservative. Now, you don't get any of that stuff in this film. But William Harrison Mitchell, what we are given, what we are led to believe, is that this is somebody who was once idealistic. This is somebody who did not get into politics because they just wanted to fuck shit up. He got into politics presumably for the right reason. That there were certain things he didn't maybe like about society and wanted to change them. You know, and obviously we could say for better or worse if we happen to agree with what his positions are. But the William Harrison Mitchell that we meet at the beginning of the film is not a very good president. He is a lousy leader. He's a terrible husband to Elizabeth Mitchell, his wife. That's the Sigourney Weaver character. Ellen Mitchell. I'm sorry, Elizabeth Mitchell's an actress. I'm fucked up. I got my ELs wrong, and that's even worse for me personally, but we don't need to get into that. But he's a lousy husband, he's a lousy president, and he's corrupt. He has not only cut corners, but we find out that he is engaged in chicanery to enrich himself. And it doesn't matter if it's whether it's at the expense of the country. You can't do it. And as they say, as was it Truman who said, the buck stops with me. I don't know if that was Truman or FDR, man. That's pretty fucking embarrassing. I should know that code. But he's just a lousy representative for the Republic. I think we can say that. But you know that somewhere along the line, he turned. It's a little bit like years later when Matt Damon gets into it in The Rainmaker, when his character of Rudy Baylor has just had enough of Jon Voight's character's just gobbledygook, that he is just a total shell of why, you know, a man who got into the law presumably not for negative reasons. And he says, do you even remember the first time you sold out? And it's a real gutting and galvanizing moment in that film. But in this movie, we don't actually get that conversation. We just understand that President Mitchell's an asshole. He doesn't do anything well other than presumably enrich himself and the people in his immediate circle. So he has two chiefs of staff, one of whom is played by a fantastic character actor from the era, Kevin Dunn, and the other is played by a guy who had been a lead actor and then transitioned to really juicy, colorful, in theory, Oscar-worthy supporting roles in the great Frank Langella. Frank Langella is an actor who could impart menace as well or better than anyone else. And he was able to do that without chewing scenery in the manner of, and we love it, let's say Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, the sense of menace. And Jack doesn't have to chew scenery, you know, you can't handle the truth. But I mean just the sense, with a glance, with a look on his face, the sense of menace that Jack Nicholson gets across in that film. Well, Frank Langella does that in this movie within the context of it being a mostly laugh-out-loud comedy that has real normal human elements. So the chiefs of staff occasionally have to they have to find somebody who looks enough like the President of the United States that he can tempt for him, you know, crowd shots when he's hundreds of feet away from any people, you know, in the gallery who could say, well, that's not really the President. Because this guy we know for sure he has one mistress, but he might have a dozen. This could be a Tiger Woods, 20 years ago situation. We really don't know. So the Secret Service, working with the chiefs of staff, Bob Alexander, and the character Kevin Dunn plays, his name is Alan, I forgot what his last name is. But they find this guy named Dave Kovic. That's the title of the movie, Dave. Dave Kovic is a regular guy. He's somewhat successful. He's a CPA. My dad, one reason why he latched onto this when he found out that Dave Kovic was a CPA, and one of my father's favorite actors ever, Charles Grodin, also plays a CPA in this film. I mean, Dad was all over that kind of stuff. He often didn't like the representations of accountants in movies, but he did in this one. So Dave Kovic is a dead ringer for William Harrison Mitchell. He looks just like him, right on down to the haircut. Now, the reason why is it's also played by Kevin Kline. And where was Kevin Kline's Oscar nomination, by the way? He is spectacular in both roles. And it's not much of a spoiler to say he doesn't play President Mitchell that much in this movie, but he gets enough time as Mitchell, and he gets to do enough as President Mitchell that we understand this guy. Unfortunately, we get where he's at this point in his life, that his marriage is a sham. The first lady is bitterly disappointed in him, and not just because he's screwing around on her, but because he has it in him to be better than what he's shown as a leader, as a president, as a head of state, as somebody affecting policy in every direction. He can be better, and he is disappointing her and has disappointed her, we're led to believe, probably for a decade. So they need Dave Kovic. Just give us we're going to use you a couple of times. Don't do anything stupid. Don't start talking. Just wave when we tell you, and that's it. It's no big deal. We'll pay you, whatever they say to him. So he does this, and he's good. He has a Kevin Kline is obviously a very attractive guy. He has a great face for the movies. He does well, and they say, we could use this guy again. Well, the President of the United States is having an affair with one of his staffers, played really well by Laura Linney, who was on the rise, like she was moving up big time at this particular juncture of her career. So William Harrison Mitchell has what seems to be some kind of a cerebral event. You want to call it a stroke, while he is hooking up with Laura Linney's character. Now, the chiefs of staff, but most particularly Bob Alexander, that's the Frank Langella character, a former United States Senator, a real power player in the world of the film. This is a character that is not a character of fun. Yeah, we have some laughs at his expense, but he is not a figure of fun. He is a very serious guy. And the issue with this, they don't want to go public with the idea that the president is, well, they don't think it's permanent, but he's temporarily not going to be able to discharge his duties. They know that. They don't want to go public. They sure as hell don't want to tell the First Lady. The problem, the reason why they don't want to, is the Vice President is a Boy Scout. The Vice President's name is Nance, Gary Nance. And I thought it was a little joke. It was a little reference to the basketball player Larry Nance. I don't think that the name Gary Nance was a coincidence. I think Gary Ross, the writer and filmmaker here, is just a big sports fan. And I think Gary Nance, Larry Nance, I really think that was not an accident. But we don't meet the vice president. And it's the kind of thing that I always appreciate in movies, especially in the era where you didn't know every character in every cameo or who was going to play a small role and not show up until late in the film. The vice president is teased. His appearance is teased for 80% of the movie, and you know it's going to be a big actor. And I didn't read any spoilers, and I don't think it was released exactly who was playing the vice president. And when Ben Kingsley, Sir Ben, shows up, man, does he fucking kill it. He practically makes the movie, he elevates it to that masterpiece level just because he is so good. And it took an actor of that stature, and with that, just that commanding screen presence that Ben Kingsley still has, to sell that character. So they don't, Bob Alexander in particular, they don't want to alert the vice president. They don't want to tell the first lady. So they come up with an idea, that poor schmuck that he was good. Let's get him in and see what we can do. So they have Dave Kovic in for a meeting, and they tell him what's going on. So the president, we're going to need you to pretend to be President Mitchell a little bit longer. And they don't really give him all of the specifics, but they give him enough to know that something is definitely wrong. He doesn't think something is rotten in the state of Denmark, but something is definitely wrong, but he goes along with it. He's a character, and maybe somehow, some way, he'll be able to do a little good. Now, he is a puppet, and you can make a lot of jokes about different politicians, different, dare I say, presidents, and even leaders of other countries where the United States, wink, wink, were controlling certain people, puppet regime, puppet machine, right? We've all heard this. I've heard this going back to the 90s. So he is pretty much installed as president, even though he is pretending to be William Harrison Mitchell, who is incapacitated because of this cerebral event that he had. But Dave Kovic has a little bit more on the ball than he seems. He is a natural leader and a natural problem solver, and he is somebody who has a lot of reasonable ideas. So the way I see Dave Kovic, when Clint Eastwood, and I'm sorry for bringing up Clint, but you know I love the guy. When Clint Eastwood became mayor of his adopted hometown of Carmel, California, let's say about 8 years before the events of where the movie Dave was made and takes place. It's set in present day, and it's supposed to be 1992, 93. Clint Eastwood, when he ran as mayor, he was very specific that he was running as a nonpartisan. It didn't matter that Clint, registered as a Republican or Libertarian or whatever. He said, this is going to be a nonpartisan. I'm going to be a nonpartisan mayor. I am just going to caucus with the people, and I'm literally just going to try to help the citizens of Carmel, California, because there were a lot of fucking stupid ordinances that they had. So Clint was insanely popular because everything he did was helpful to the people. Now, he didn't have a ton of people, and most of them were really loaded. He was working with a stacked deck in his favor, absolutely. But Dave Kovic has a lot of good ideas, and he has to sell the con to the first lady. They rarely see each other. It's very important to understand this is not a conventional marriage. They live separate lives. And again, you can insert your Bill Clinton jokes from back in the day, but this movie was not made. This movie was made before Bill Clinton was elected. It was wrapped sometime in the summer or fall of 1992. So the Clinton stuff just happened to work out the way that it did, that a lot of people felt, well, this is Bill and Hillary. It just happened to seem that way. That was not the intention. But hey, like we say, don't trust the artist, trust the art. I'm just giving you the year. You could take from this whatever you want. It works from a 2024, 2025 perspective of the idea of just because a president and a first lady are technically married, it doesn't mean that they do anything together. But Dave has to keep this con going. And Kevin Kline is so good in every scene, the level of focus and concentration, the way that, yeah, he has the same voice, Bill Mitchell or Dave Kovic, but the way he changes his speech pattern and the canter of his speech when he is pretending to be Mitchell, because Bill Mitchell and Dave Kovic don't sound the same. They don't speak in the same fashion. And it's a subtle little detail that Kline pulls off that isn't the first thing you think of when you look back on this movie, but there are certain public appearances that he has to make with the first lady. And is he going to be able to keep this con going, and for how long? And if Bill Mitchell makes a recovery, as they seem to think he will, but now you start, well, maybe they're just telling Dave that because they can keep manipulating him. Well, what happens then? And it's to the film's credit that we really don't know how it's all going to turn out. And there are a lot of contemporary moments of humor and real life stuff put into the film that now you wouldn't think was real life stuff. There is a moment where Oliver Stone, conspiracy master himself, he's fresh off JFK, and Oliver Stone comes on with Larry King. OJ. Well, those were the days when Larry King was a big shot, interviewing everybody. OJ. He was on every night during the O.J. Simpson lunacy, which was a year or so after this film. But Larry King, in the world of the movies, playing himself, and Oliver Stone is playing himself. And this is after the switcheroo. That Dave Kovic is president, and there is Oliver Stone saying, I'm telling you, that's not the same guy. That is not Bill Mitchell. The audience was screaming First, when we saw Oliver Stone, everybody knew who he was. And then when he starts talking about another conspiracy, the place was going nuts. And in that same part of the movie, there is a cameo by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, from a 2025 perspective, let's say we're under 40. Okay. You might know, well, Arnold worked with Ivan Reitman in Twins. He worked with him, unfortunately, in Junior. That's good enough. That's why Arnold did the cameo, but that's not exactly why Arnold did the cameo. When H.W. was president, Arnold was friends with him, but Arnold was the president. He was the chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness. So when he shows up, and it's a quick scene where he's teaching kids, a little kindergarten cop, wink, wink reference, but he's teaching kids, don't eat donuts, eat healthier, and I hope your parents will allow you to. It's maybe the best scene in the film. It comes out of nowhere, but that was not an accident. That was, at the time, this was what Arnold did, chairing on the President's Council for Physical Fitness, and President Mitchell is presented as a Republican. Like, it all worked, and it is a product of its time in that sense, but it's timeless because it's Arnold. We all know, even if we're under 30, he was Mr. Olympia, and he was involved in politics. We know, married to Maria Shriver for so many years, the Kennedy clan. He was the governor of California. Really, really great stuff. And the film just kind of gently, almost sweetly goes along. It's not in a hurry. And there are a lot of real life power brokers in Washington who played themselves in the world of the film. John McLaughlin, who was famous for all of his gesticulating, to use a Walt Frazier word. Knicks are playing game 2 tonight in Boston. But John McLaughlin with that kind of, I want to know what's going on with Mitchell. That's exactly how he talked. I want to know what's going on with Bill Clinton. I want to know what's going on with Barack. That is exactly how John McLaughlin and McLaughlin Group, they had the same people from back then. It's just all awesome stuff. Jay Leno plays himself. His hair was a lot darker back then. And everyone's trying to figure out, why would this disconnected, dispassionate, not giving a fuck President Mitchell all of a sudden become a populist, man of the people, libertarian type? Let's see if we can get every American who wants a job, a decent paying job. I mean, it's all like wacky utopian ideas. But Kline is so convincing and so earnest. He starts to win over the people who just put him there so that they could monkey around. It's like being John Malkovich, or the John Cusack character is just a puppet master. He wins over the First Lady. He wins over Kevin Dunn's character of Alan. He doesn't really win over Frank Langella, but he has enough people on his side. Ving Rhames as, the chief, he's the Secret Service guy assigned to the president. And he knows, obviously, he knows the story. And the way that Dave sort of subtly assumes command for real, it's so well done. And there are no steps skipped. So that's what I'm saying, where you see all of these different people of different political and philosophical affiliations. It's not that they're falling in line because they don't think they have a choice. They're falling in line because this guy has good ideas regardless of, well, I believe in this and he actually believes in that. But that's not what you're talking about. You can debate the death penalty. You can debate legalizing marijuana. You can disagree on that. But he's putting out ideas. And again, this is a fantasy. None of this would ever happen. But he's putting out bipartisan ideas. And the film works. And it sells all of that beautifully, where it doesn't seem like we could say in the real world this wouldn't happen, but in the world of the film, it is entirely plausible. And without going into spoiler territory, because this is a film, I don't know anybody who has seen this movie who doesn't love it. You go on YouTube, Popcorn in Bed, Cassie, the head of the channel, she sometimes works with her sister, but it's her channel. She was completely gobsmacked by that movie. She thought it was absolutely incredible. She's the one who was, Tom Cruise is a huge fan of her channel. He actually invited her personally to Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. He said, I think your channel is amazing. You were cracking us up on the set of Mission Impossible. We were having tough days. We were watching your reactions to our films, and you were fucking riot. He didn't say fucking riot, but that was the gist of it. But I don't know anybody who does not love this movie, who has seen it. It plays for every possible audience. And even though there are those kind of anachronistic products of their time, Oliver Stone and Arnold in that capacity. This film tells a timeless story, and it is somewhat reminiscent of the Frank Capra classic from the 40s with pretty young James Stewart, even, before It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's not as earnest and on the nose as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This film has a lot more problems that are floating around the narrative that we have to focus on, rather than, is Jefferson Smith going to be able to filibuster, for days on end? There's a lot of different moving plot threads in the world of Dave, and it gnaws at you. I don't see how this film, what would be a happy ending, or how could this work to the satisfaction? Because it's not going to be a down ending. It's not going to be beat you over the head. It has that sense of fun and sense of whimsy. This was top 10 favorite movies of my father's entire life. He watched it every time it was on, and I know this is a cliche, older generation, he wore out his copy of the movie. This was a film that would always put him in a good mood, and it is a crowd pleaser, but it's a crowd pleaser in the best sense, because the kind of lump in the throat is earned. The laughs are well earned. The timing, the way that Ivan Reitman blocked certain scenes, great reaction shots from Frank Langella. It is a fantastic film. I would give this at least a 9 out of 10. It's funny. It has heart, and it has a good message. It shows, at least in the world of this film and the time the film was made, it's possible for people with different views to actually agree on a couple of important things. Just a couple. Doesn't have to be, because it won't ever be everything. We're not ever going to agree with everyone on everything. But maybe you can do some good. Maybe you can get a few things of import done with people you normally would not side with in an argument or in a political discussion. It doesn't mean you have to hate your opponent or disagree with your political opponent just because, well, if he says this, I have to be for that. Because you do get a little of that in the world of the movie. The Frank Langella character, you could be a wise guy and say he's the only one who seems like a real politician in this film. You probably wouldn't be wrong. But the Kevin Dunn character of Alan has a real legitimate arc. And it's certainly the best performance in Kevin Dunn's career. He is marvelous in this film. I mean, he could have gotten a supporting actor nomination. But again, 93 was that fucking crazy year. The supporting actor category in that particular year may have been the strongest field ever. Pete Postlethwaite, In the Name of the Father. Leonardo DiCaprio, What's Eating Gilbert Grape. John Malkovich, who I thought should have won, In the Line of Fire. The eventual winner, Tommy Lee Jones, The Fugitive, and Ralph Fiennes for Schindler's List. There was no room for Kevin Dunn or Frank Langella. Apparently there was no room for Kevin Kline as Best Actor. There wasn't any room either for Christopher Reeve in Remains of the Day, sadly, because that's the best performance of his career, not in a movie with Superman as part of the title. But Dave released on this day, 1993, a fantastic human comedy. What a performance by Kevin Kline. It's unfortunate he wasn't nominated for an Oscar. But directed by Ivan Reitman and starring Kevin Kline in a dual role, President William Harrison Mitchell and CPA Dave Kovic. A fantastic also Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Mitchell. A fire Frank Langella as the big bad, Bob Alexander, former senator and chief of staff, and a wonderful Kevin Dunn as Alan, and Laura Linney in a small role as the staffer who has an affair with the President of the United States, spinning the film into the direction it ultimately takes. This has been episode 507 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your hopefully happy hump day here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.